A ruthless gang storms into a small town's church to confront its peaceful priest, unaware they're facing the deadliest gunslinger in the American West. Some say he once took down 15 men in a single street fight, without drawing first. Now, his past has come to collect its dues. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching New Mexico sun beats down on a lone figure riding through the desert. Father Michael Sullivan's weathered black cassock billows in the hot wind as his horse carefully picks its way through the canyon. His hands, clasped loosely on the reins, show the subtle calluses that no amount of prayer can erase. The right one they used to call the ghost hand, for how fast it could draw and how deadly accurate it was. Even now, after 5 years of priesthood, the weight of his hidden Colt revolver feels more natural than the rosary beads at his belt. A distant gunshot echoes through the canyon. Father Sullivan's head snaps up, his eyes narrowing. 3 more shots follow in quick succession. His horse stamps nervously, but the priest remains still, listening. A woman's scream carries on the wind, followed by the sound of children crying. His jaw tightens. Some demons, it seems, never stop testing a man's resolve. Without hesitation, Sullivan spurs his horse toward the sound. As he crests a ridge, the scene unfolds below him like a painting from the depths of his past life. 3 bandits surrounding a broken-down wagon, their horses nearby, reins trailing in the dust. A man lies motionless in the dirt, blood seeping into the thirsty ground, while a woman clutches 2 children behind the wagon's wheel. One of the bandits is rifling through their belongings, tossing their meager possessions aside with casual cruelty. The bandits don't notice Sullivan's approach until his horse's hooves scatter rocks down the slope. They turn, hands dropping to their guns with the practiced ease of men who've killed before. The priest raises his empty palms, showing the white collar at his throat. The afternoon sun casts his shadow long across the rocky ground, like judgment stretching out its hand. Gentlemen, his voice carries clearly across the distance, steady and calm as still water. Surely there's no need for further violence today. Whatever you're looking for, it's not worth the price of more bloodshed. The largest bandit, a man with a nasty scar running from his left eye to his jaw like a tear track of violence, spits in the dust. His eyes are the cold, dead color of rattlesnake scales. Move along, Father. This ain't your concern. Man of God should know better than to stick his nose where it doesn't belong. Sullivan dismounts slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. Every step he takes down the slope is measured, precisely. I'm afraid I can't do that. His eyes flick to the fallen man, noting the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Still alive, but bleeding. The wound looks like a gut shot. Painful, but survivable with quick attention. That man needs a doctor, and these children don't need to see any more violence today. Then they can close their eyes, another bandit sneers, younger than the others, with a yellow bandana around his neck like a splash of coward's gold. Because you're about to join their pa in the dirt. Something changes in Sullivan's bearing, subtle, but profound. His shoulders loosen. His weight shifts almost imperceptibly. The afternoon sun catches his eyes, and for a moment, they seem to gleam with an old, dangerous light. The air grows still, as if the desert itself is holding its breath. I wouldn't, he says softly, his voice carrying the weight of countless gunfights and unmarked graves. Some roads, once you start down them, there's no coming back. The bandits hesitate. There's something in his voice that makes their skin crawl, something that speaks of dark things best left buried in shallow graves across the territory. The youngest one takes a half step back, his bravado cracking like sun-baked mud. The scarred bandit draws anyway, his movement quick as a striking snake. What happens next seems impossible to the watching woman and children. Sullivan's right hand moves in a blur, and suddenly there's a Colt revolver in it, as if conjured from thin air. 3 shots ring out in such rapid succession, they sound like a single extended crack of thunder, echoing off the canyon walls like God's own judgment. 3 guns hit the dirt before their owners' bodies follow. None of the bandits had even cleared leather. The acrid smell of gun smoke mingles with the dust, a familiar incense from Sullivan's past life. Sullivan holsters the Colt beneath his cassock with the same liquid grace, then hurries to the fallen man. As he kneels to examine the wound, the woman stares at him in shock, her children peeking out from behind her skirts with wide eyes. Who are you?" she whispers, crossing herself. "Just a humble servant of God, ma'am." He tears a strip from his cassock to bind the wound. "Though I wasn't always." His hands move with practiced efficiency, speaking of experience with bullet wounds that no ordinary priest should have. Later that evening, as Sullivan rides into the small town of Redemption's Cross, the setting sun casts long shadows across the empty main street. He dismounts at the church, his movements betraying no sign of the afternoon's violence. But as he climbs the steps to the church door, his right hand trembles slightly, not from fear or age, but from the weight of what he's trying to leave behind. Inside the church, he lights a candle and kneels before the cross. The flickering light throws his shadow against the wall, and for a moment, it looks more like the silhouette of a gunfighter than a priest. "Lord," he whispers, "give me strength to keep walking this new path." His prayer is interrupted by the church door creaking open, the sound like an old bullet being chambered. Sheriff Wheeler's spurs jingle as he walks up the aisle, each step a deliberate announcement of his presence. "Heard about what happened out in the canyon today, Michael. News travels fast in these parts, especially when it comes to certain kinds of shooting." Sullivan doesn't turn. 3 men who needed stopping were stopped. That's all. 3 men dead. Clean shots, all of them. One witness said it happened faster than she could blink. Wheeler pauses, his voice dropping lower. "Sounds an awful lot. Like stories I used to hear about the ghost of Santa Fe. Stories about a man who could draw and fire before his opponent's fingers even twitched." "The ghost is dead, Tom. Has been for 5 years. I buried him myself when I took these vows." "Maybe." Wheeler's voice grows serious, heavy with warning. "But there's something you need to know. Marcus Blackwood's gang was spotted heading this way. Word is they're looking for the ghost, and they ain't the type to believe in death certificates. They say Blackwood's been hunting you ever since you killed his brother in that shootout in Dodge City." Sullivan finally turns, and in the candlelight his face shows the weight of every life he's ever taken, every soul he's sent to judgment. "I'm not that man anymore." "No," Wheeler agrees, "you're not. But Blackwood doesn't know that. And when he comes..." The sheriff leaves the thought unfinished, the threat hanging in the air like gun smoke. Sullivan looks back at the cross, its shadow stretching across the altar like the barrel of a gun. "God's house is no place for violence." "Amen to that, old friend," Wheeler says quietly. "Amen to that." As the sheriff's footsteps fade away, Sullivan remains kneeling, his right hand, the ghost hand, clasped tightly in prayer. But beneath his cassock, the Colt revolver rests against his ribs like an old sin, waiting to be remembered, while outside, the wind carries dust and whispers of approaching violence across the darkening streets of Redemption's Cross. Dawn breaks over Redemption's Cross, painting the church steeple in hues of gold and crimson. Father Sullivan stands at the altar preparing for morning mass, his movements measured and precise as he arranges the sacred vessels. The early light streaming through the stained glass windows casts colorful shadows across his face, momentarily disguising the hard lines etched there by years of violence. Sister Maria Delgado watches from the doorway, her dark eyes studying the priest with quiet concern. She served this church for 20 years, seen priests come and go, but none quite like Sullivan. There's something in the way he moves, the way his eyes constantly scan the room, that speaks of a man who spent more time watching for danger than watching for salvation. "The children are asking about yesterday's incident," she says finally. her voice echoing softly in the empty church. Word spreads quickly, even among the little ones. Sullivan's hands pause over the chalice. What are they saying? They say an angel of death rides the desert wearing a priest's collar. Sister Maria crosses herself. Though I suspect the truth is somewhat more earthly. Before Sullivan can respond, the church door creaks open. Dr. Sarah Mitchell steps inside, her medical bag clutched in one hand. The town doctor's usually pristine appearance is disheveled, suggesting a long night of work. The man you brought in yesterday will live, she announces, her boots clicking against the wooden floor as she approaches. Though I suspect you already knew that, Father. The way you bound that wound, that was military field medicine, wasn't it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sullivan returns to arranging the altar, his movements more deliberate now. We all have our past experiences, Doctor. Indeed, she sets her bag down with a thud. Just like we all have our reasons for coming to places like Redemption's Cross. Some seeking redemption, others running from something or someone. The morning light catches Sullivan's right hand as it moves over the altar cloth, highlighting old scars and gunpowder burns that no amount of time can erase. The man who did that shooting, who killed those bandits, he doesn't exist anymore. No? Dr. Mitchell raises an eyebrow. Then I suppose those 3 perfect shots just happened by divine intervention? Sister Maria steps forward, her voice gentle but firm. Sarah, please. What's done is done. Is it? The doctor's voice carries an edge of concern. Because I've heard rumors, Father. Marcus Blackwood's gang isn't just any group of outlaws. They say he's gathered the meanest, fastest guns in the territory. And they say he's been tracking the ghost of Santa Fe for 5 years, ever since his brother drew first and died last, Sullivan finishes quietly. I remember. The morning bell begins to toll, its sound rolling across the town like distant thunder. Sullivan moves to the window, watching as the first parishioners begin, making their way toward the church. Among them, he spots Mayor Crawford, his silver pocket watch catching the sun as he checks the time. The past has a way of finding us, Dr. Mitchell says, gathering her bag, no matter how far we run or how many cloth collars we hide behind. I'm not hiding, Sullivan responds, though his right hand unconsciously brushes against the hidden Colt under his cassock. I'm trying to walk a different path. And if Blackwood and his gang don't let you, Sister Maria asks softly. Sullivan turns from the window, his face set in grim lines. Then I'll pray for their souls, because if they force my hand... He leaves. The threat unfinished as Mayor Crawford enters the church. Father Sullivan, the mayor calls out, his political smile firmly in place. Quite a bit of excitement yesterday, I hear. 3 men died in the canyon. God's mercy extends to all, Mayor, Sullivan replies evenly. Even those who test it. Crawford's smile doesn't waver, but his eyes grow sharp. Indeed. Though I wonder if mercy was what stopped those men, or something more temporal. He glances meaningfully at Sullivan's right hand. The town council is concerned, Father. We've worked hard to build Redemption's Cross into a peaceful community. The last thing we need is trouble following anyone here. Sullivan meets the mayor's gaze steadily. Trouble finds its own way, Mayor Crawford. It doesn't need an invitation. Perhaps. Crawford adjusts his silk vest, a gesture of nervous habit. But when it does come, I pray it finds us prepared. And, speaking of preparation, the council would appreciate your presence at tonight's meeting. Recent events have raised certain concerns. As more townspeople file into the church, Sullivan nods slowly. I'll be there, though I suspect the council's concerns and God's concerns may differ somewhat. The mayor departs with a tight smile, leaving Sullivan standing at the altar as the morning sun climbs higher. Sister Maria touches his arm gently. The children are waiting for their lesson, Father. Sullivan nods, pushing aside thoughts of Blackwood, of bullets, of blood in the desert sand. But as he turns to follow Sister Maria to the small classroom at the back of the church, his right hand trembles slightly, the ghost hand remembering its old dance with death. Outside, a hot wind blows down the main street, carrying dust and whispers of approaching violence. In the distance, a lone rider appears on the horizon, then another and another. Dark shapes against the morning sun, like vultures circling their prey. Redemption's Cross holds its breath, waiting for the storm that's coming, while inside its church, a priest with a gunfighter's eyes prepares to teach children about peace, even as war clouds gather on the horizon. The town council meeting hall swelters in the evening heat, its windows thrown open to catch what little breeze stirs the desert air. Father Sullivan sits quietly at the back, his black cassock out of place among the fine suits and polished boots of Redemption's Cross's leading citizens. Mayor Crawford stands at the podium, his face shining with sweat as he addresses the gathered crowd. "Friends, neighbors," Crawford begins, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "We face a situation that requires our immediate attention. Word has reached us that Marcus Blackwood's gang has crossed into our territory. 3 days ago, they raided the township of Sierra Vista. 2 days ago, they burned half of Copper Springs to the ground. And now," he pauses, his eyes finding Sullivan in the crowd, "they're heading straight for us." A murmur of fear ripples through the assembly. Sullivan notices several hands instinctively moving to gun belts, and he wonders how many of these peaceful citizens have ever actually fired a shot in anger. Sheriff Wheeler steps forward, his weathered face gravely. "We've confirmed at least 15 riders, all of them hardened gunmen. They've been recruiting, gathering the fastest guns they can find. Word is, they're looking for someone specific." His gaze meets Sullivan's. "Someone they believe is hiding in our town. The ghost of Santa Fe!" a voice calls out from the crowd. Heads turn, and Sullivan recognizes Benjamin Hayes, the local banker, standing up. "That's who they're after, isn't it? The gunfighter who killed Blackwood's brother." Sullivan remains still, but his right hand twitches almost imperceptibly beneath his cassock. "I've heard stories about the ghost," another voice adds. "They say he could kill a man before they even cleared leather. They say he once faced down 15 men in Dead Man's Gulch and left them all in the dirt." "Stories," Mayor Crawford interrupts sharply, "are not our concern. What matters is protecting our town. Sheriff Wheeler, what are our options?" Wheeler shifts his weight, spurs jingling. "We've got 6 deputies. Good men, but..." He shakes his head. "Against Blackwood's crew? It'd be a massacre." "We could send for the army," someone suggests. "Nearest cavalry post is 3 days' ride." Wheeler responds, "Blackwood will be here by tomorrow night." The room erupts in frightened chatter. Sullivan watches as fear spreads through the crowd like poison in a water well. He sees Sister Maria at the side of the room, her hands clasped, in prayer. Dr. Mitchell stands near her, her face set in grim lines. "There might be another way," Mayor Crawford says suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Father Sullivan, would you step forward, please?" Sullivan rises slowly, conscious of every eye in the room turning to him. His boots echo on the wooden floor as he approaches the podium. "There are rumors, Father," Crawford continues, his political smile nowhere in sight now. "Rumors about your past, about who you were before you came to us." "We all have pasts, Mayor," Sullivan responds quietly. "What matters is the path we choose now." "And what path would you choose for our town?" Crawford's voice hardens. "Because I've made inquiries. 5 years ago, the ghost of Santa Fe disappeared. Right around the same time, a mysterious priest with an unusually steady hand appeared in the territory. The room falls silent. Sullivan can feel the weight of their stares, their fear and desperate hope mixing like oil and water. "I took vows," Sullivan says firmly, "vows of peace, of service to God." "And what about your vow to protect the innocent?" Sheriff Wheeler interjects. "There are women and children in this town, Michael. Families. If Blackwood comes—" "When," Crawford corrects. "When he comes. And we all know what he'll do. He'll burn this town to the ground looking for the ghost. Unless—" He lets the word hang in the air. Sullivan's voice drops to a dangerous whisper. "Unless what, Mayor?" "Unless the ghost meets him first, outside of town. Settles this the way it began." "You're asking me to kill again," Sullivan states flatly. "I'm asking you to save lives," Crawford counters. "One sin to prevent 100 others. Surely even God understands that mathematics." Sister Maria steps forward suddenly. "This is barbaric. Father Sullivan is a man of God now. You cannot ask him to—" "They won't give us a choice," Dr. Mitchell interrupts. "I've treated gunshot wounds before. Seen what men like Blackwood do. They'll come here, and they'll keep killing until they find what they're looking for." Sullivan moves to the window, looking out over the town he's come to call home. The setting sun paints the church steeple blood red, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howls. A lonely, haunting sound. "If I do this," he says finally, "I break my vows. Everything I've worked for these past 5 years. Gone." "And if you don't?" Wheeler asks softly. "How many innocent lives will that cost? How many vows to protect and serve will be broken then?" Sullivan's right hand, the ghost hand, flexes unconsciously. "You're asking me to become him again, the man I buried." "No," Crawford responds. "We're asking you to be both, the priest who protects his flock, by any means necessary." A long moment passes. Sullivan feels the weight of his hidden Colt revolver, feels the old familiar itch in his trigger finger. Finally, he turns back to face the assembly. "I'll need one day," he says quietly. "One day to prepare. And I'll need your word, Mayor Crawford, that no matter what happens, this town will still have a place for a priest afterward. Even one with blood on his hands." Crawford nods solemnly. "You have my word." As the meeting disperses, Sheriff Wheeler approaches Sullivan. "You sure about this, old friend?" Sullivan's eyes are distant, seeing past the present into a blood-soaked history he thought he'd left behind. "No. But I'm sure about one thing. God may forgive us our sins, Tom. But first we have to live long enough to ask for that forgiveness." Outside, the wind picks up, carrying the smell of sage and gun smoke. Tomorrow, the ghost of Santa Fe will ride again, and the peaceful streets of Redemption's Cross will echo with the sound of judgment rendered not by God's hand, but by the hand of a priest who once dealt death faster than any man in the West. Dawn hasn't yet touched the eastern sky when Father Sullivan slips out of the church, a wooden box tucked under his arm. The streets of Redemption's Cross lie empty and silent, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the desert sage. He makes his way to the abandoned silver mine at the edge of town, its weathered timbers creaking softly in the pre-morning breeze. Inside the mine's entrance, Sullivan sets the box down on a barrel and opens it slowly. The worn wood contains memories he's tried to bury. A gun belt of aged leather, its holster custom-made for a right-handed draw. 2 Colt peacemakers, their blued steel showing the careful maintenance of tools that have saved his life countless times. A handful of brass cartridges that gleam dully in the lantern light. "Thought I might find you here," Sheriff Wheeler's voice echoes from the entrance. Some habits don't change even after 5 years. Sullivan doesn't look up from the guns. "Used to practice out here, didn't you? Before you took the badge?" "Still, do sometimes." Wheeler steps inside, his spurs jingling softly. "Though never as fast as you. Never saw anyone as fast as the ghost." Sullivan picks up one of the Colts, his right hand remembering its weight like an old dance partner. "Speed isn't everything, Tom. It's about certainty, about knowing, deep in your bones, that when you pull that trigger, you're right with God and your conscience. And are you? Right with both? Before Sullivan can answer, hoofbeats sound from the road. Both men tense, but it's only Dr. Mitchell, approaching on her bay mare. She dismounts quickly, her medical bag clutched tight. "They're here," she announces without preamble. "An advance party. 3 riders just came into town, Jamie Rodriguez and the Cruz twins. They're at the saloon." Sullivan's hand tightens on the Colt. "Quick draw Rodriguez. He can't be more than 20. 19, Wheeler confirms, but they say he's already killed 12 men. Fast, too. Maybe not ghost fast, but he's just a boy," Sullivan mutters, but his eyes are hard. "Playing at being a man." Dr. Mitchell steps closer, her voice urgent. "They're asking questions, Father, about the ghost, about you. It won't take them long to put it together." Sullivan begins loading the Colts with practiced efficiency, each movement precise and economical. How long until Blackwood arrives? Sunset. Probably, Wheeler estimates. These 3 are just testing the waters, seeing if the rumors are true. Sullivan slides the guns into their holsters, then removes his priest's collar. The black cassock follows, revealing simple trail clothes underneath. The gun belt settles around his hips like a forgotten sin coming home. "Michael," Dr. Mitchell says softly, "you don't have to do this. We could still try to evacuate the town." "Into the desert? With women and children?" He shakes his head. "Blackwood would run them down before they got 5 miles. A commotion erupts from the direction of the town. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Sullivan moves to the mine entrance, Wheeler and Dr. Mitchell following. In the growing light, they can see a crowd gathering outside the saloon. Sounds like the boys getting impatient, Wheeler observes grimly. Sullivan checks his guns one last time. Then perhaps it's time he learned some patience. "Tom, get everyone off the streets." "Sarah, be ready. One way or another, you'll have work to do today." "What are you going to do?" Dr. Mitchell asks, though her tone suggests she already knows. "What I have to." Sullivan steps out of the mine, his movements different now. Liquid, predatory. "But first, I'm going to give that boy a chance to walk away, more than Blackwood ever gave anyone." As Sullivan strides toward town, Wheeler calls after him. "They say Rodriguez is faster than greased lightning, Michael. That he can kill a man before they even think of drawing." Sullivan doesn't turn around. Then he's about to learn the difference between speed and experience, between being quick and being dead right. The sun finally crests the eastern mountains as Sullivan walks down the empty main street. Shop! Owners hurriedly close their shutters. A mother hurries her children inside. From the saloon comes the sound of breaking furniture and young, arrogant laughter. Sister Maria appears on the church steps, her eyes widening at Sullivan's transformation. "Father, please." "Not father right now, sister," he says quietly. "Right now, I'm something else, something that knows how to stop men like these." "You're still a priest," she insists, "still a man of God." "Yes," he agrees, stopping in the middle of the street. "And right now, God needs someone who knows how to handle the devil's tools." The saloon doors burst open. Jamie Quickdraw Rodriguez swaggers out, flanked by the Cruz twins. He's barely more than a boy, with a teenager's swagger and a gunfighter's. Cold eyes. His gun belt is tied low, ready for a fast draw. "Well, well," Rodriguez calls out, his voice carrying the hint of a smile. "Look what we found, brothers. A priest who thinks he's a gunfighter." The Cruz twins spread out slightly, their hands hovering near their guns. The morning sun catches their matching silver spurs, making them sparkle like stars fallen to earth. "No," Sullivan responds calmly. "Just a gunfighter who thought he could be a priest. Now, son, I'm giving you one chance, just one, to ride out of here. Take it, and you might live to see 20. Rodriguez's smile turns ugly. "You know who old man. They call me Quick Draw, fastest gun south of—" "I know exactly who you are, boy," Sullivan interrupts. his voice carrying the weight of countless gunfights. "The question is, do you know who I am?" The young gunslinger's hand drifts closer to his revolver. "Why don't you tell me?" "Because if you knew," Sullivan says softly, his right hand loose and ready at his side, "you'd already be running." The morning sun beats down on Redemption's Cross's main street, casting hard shadows that cut like knife edges. Quick Draw Rodriguez stands with his feet planted in the dust, his young face twisted in a sneer that doesn't quite hide his growing uncertainty. The Cruz twins flank him, their matching silver spurs catching the light as they shift nervously. Behind a nearby window, Sheriff Wheeler positions himself with a clear view, his Winchester ready. "Sweet Jesus," he mutters. "The boy's actually going to try it." Dr. Mitchell crouches beside him, her medical bag open. "Which one, Sullivan or Rodriguez?" "Both of them. God help them both." Rodriguez's voice carries across the empty street, high with false bravado. "You know what they say about me in Dodge City? They say I'm so fast, I can shoot a man's gun clean out of his holster before he even thinks about drawing." Sullivan remains perfectly still, his black trail coat moving slightly in the hot breeze. "They say a lot of things in Dodge City, son. Most of them aren't worth the breath it takes to speak them." Ana Cruz, the female twin, laughs sharply. "Big talk from an old man playing dress-up. Where's your collar, father? Did you forget your prayers?" "My prayers," Sullivan responds quietly, "are for your souls, all of them, because in about 1 minute, at least some of you are going to need them." Diego Cruz's hand inches closer to his gun. 3 against 1, old man. Those aren't good odds." "Better than the 15 men who tried to take the ghost in Dead Man's Gulch," Rodriguez snaps back, though sweat now beads on his forehead. "Ain't that right, father?" A whisper ripples through the watching town, hidden faces at windows, people crouching behind water barrels and wagon wheels. The name carries on the wind. The ghost. It's really him. "Last chance," Sullivan says, his voice carrying the weight of a funeral bell. "Ride out now. Live to see another sunrise." Rodriguez's face hardens. "You know what? I don't believe you're him. The ghost would have drawn by now. You're just some priest with delusions of—" The rest of his sentence is lost in the explosive sound of gunfire. Rodriguez's draw is blindingly fast, a blur of motion that most eyes can't follow. But Sullivan's right hand moves like lightning, made flesh, like death itself reaching out to collect its due. 2 shots ring out as one. Rodriguez's bullet tears through the empty air where Sullivan had been a fraction of a second before. Sullivan's shot hits with surgical precision, not killing, but sending the young gunslinger's weapon spinning from his grip to land in the dust. The Cruz twins react instantly, their hands dropping to their guns. But Sullivan's already moving, his right hand dealing death with terrible efficiency. 2 more shots crack across the morning air like thunder. Diego Cruz's gun clears leather just as Sullivan's bullet takes him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Ana manages to get off a shot, but Sullivan's already ghosted to the side, his return fire striking her gun hand with devastating accuracy. 4 shots, 4 hits, none fatal. The entire exchange has taken less than 3 seconds. Rodriguez kneels in the dust, staring at his empty hand in disbelief. Blood trickles from where Sullivan's bullet grazed his fingers. The Cruz twins lie groaning, their matching silver spurs no longer catching the light. "That's what the ghost could do," Sullivan says quietly, his gun still trained on them. "But the ghost was killed. The priest in me. He aims to wound." "Impossible," Rodriguez whispers. "Nobody's that fast. Nobody." "The ghost was," Ana Cruz gasps through her pain. "Marcus told us how his brother died. Said it was like fighting a shadow." Sullivan holsters his gun with the same liquid grace that drew it. "Sheriff Wheeler, get these 3 patched up and out of my town, and make sure they carry a message to Marcus Blackwood." Wheeler emerges from his position, rifle ready. "What message?" Tell him the ghost of Santa Fe is dead. Sullivan's eyes are hard as desert flint. But something worse is waiting for him here. A man who knows every one of his sins and has had 5 years to think about how to make him answer. For them. Dr. Mitchell rushes forward to tend to the wounded, her skilled hands already assessing the damage. Clean shots, she mutters. Deliberate. You could have killed them all. Death's too easy, Sullivan responds. Let them live with knowing. Let them carry the story back to Blackwood. Mayor Crawford appears from the crowd that's beginning to emerge. That was quite a demonstration, Father. His voice carries a mix of awe and fear, though I notice you're not wearing your collar. The collar's still there, Mayor, just on the inside now. Sullivan turns toward the church, his movements once again those of a priest rather than a gunfighter. Sometimes God's work requires more than just prayers. Sister Maria meets him at the church steps, her face troubled. The children saw Michael. They were watching from the Sunday school window. Sullivan pauses, his right hand, the ghost hand, trembling slightly. Then perhaps it's time they learned that sometimes protecting the innocent means confronting evil on its own terms. And what of your soul? She asks softly. What happens to the priest when the gunfighter returns? Sullivan looks up at the cross, atop the church steeple, its shadow stretching across the bloodied street like God's own judgment. Maybe that's what redemption really is, sister. Not running from who we were, but using who we were to protect who we've become. Inside the church, Sullivan kneels before the altar, his gun belt heavy with the weight of what's to come. Behind him, Dr. Mitchell's voice carries through the open door as she tends to the wounded, mixing with the sound of Wheeler reading Rodriguez and the Cruz twins their rights. Forgive me, Father, Sullivan whispers, for what I have done, and what I must still do. Outside, the hot wind carries dust and whispers across the town. By sunset, word of the shootout will have reached Blackwood's ears. The real storm is still coming, and Redemption's Cross holds its breath, watching its priest walk the razor's edge between saving souls and sending them to judgment. The afternoon. Sun hangs like a burning coin in the sky as Wheeler's deputies load Rodriguez and the Cruz twins into a wagon bound for the territorial prison. Dr. Mitchell checks their bandages one last time, her movements efficient and professional. They'll live, she announces to Sullivan, who stands watching from the church steps. Though young Rodriguez might not play the piano again, at least not with that hand. Better a damaged hand than a pine box, Sullivan responds, his voice carrying no satisfaction, only a weary certainty. He's changed back into his cassock, though the gun belt remains hidden beneath it. Rodriguez looks up from the wagon, his young face stripped of its earlier bravado. How'd you do it? Even seeing it, I still can't believe anyone could move that fast. Sullivan walks to the wagon, his boots stirring small clouds of dust. Speed isn't the answer, son. Speed kills. Usually the one who relies on it too much. But, they say you're the fastest? I survived, Sullivan interrupts, because I learned to read men's souls in their eyes, to see the moment their pride becomes their death. You draw fast, but you don't really see. Ana Cruz, her hand heavily bandaged, watches the exchange with narrow eyes. Marcus will kill you for this. Slow. He's been planning it for 5 years. 5 years, Sullivan echoes. A long time to carry hate. He turns to Wheeler. Get them out of here, Tom. Make sure they understand. Next time won't be just wounded hands and shoulders. As the wagon pulls away, Mayor Crawford approaches, mopping his brow with his ever-present handkerchief. That was quite a show of force, Father, though perhaps not the kind of sermon most priests would deliver. Sometimes the lesson needs to be written in blood, Sullivan responds, though I prefer it when the ink is minimal. Speaking of lessons, Crawford gestures toward the church. Through the window, they can see the children gathered for their afternoon Bible study, their young faces pressed against the glass. They're waiting for you, Sullivan nods slowly. Yes, I suppose they are. Inside the church, the children fall silent as Sullivan enters. Their usual restless energy is subdued, replaced by a mixture of fear and awe. Little Maria Ramirez, barely 7 years old, clutches her Bible like a shield. Is it true? Tommy. Wheeler, the sheriff's nephew, blurts out, Are you really the ghost? Sullivan takes his place at the front of the room, conscious of every pair of young eyes fixed upon him. What does the good book tell us about ghosts, Tommy? That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Sullivan's voice is gentle but firm. You want to know about the shooting, about violence and death and the kind of stories young boys think are exciting until they see them up close. Sarah Cooper, the blacksmith's daughter, raises her hand tentatively. Did you kill those men? No, Sarah. I stopped them. There's a difference. One I hope you all understand someday. But you could have killed them. Tommy persists. I heard Pa talking. Said you're the fastest gun in the territory. Sullivan's right hand flexes unconsciously. Being fast with a gun isn't something to admire, children. It's a burden. A weight that never leaves you. Then why did you do it? Little Maria asks softly. Because sometimes, Sullivan says, choosing his words carefully, God asks us to use our burdens to help others, to protect those who can't protect themselves. Jake Martinez, 13 and already showing his father's quick temper, stands up suddenly. Show us! Show us how you did it! No! Sullivan's voice cracks like a whip. This isn't a game, Jake. It's not something to practice or pretend at. Each time I draw this gun, a piece of my soul goes with it. The children fall silent again, but Sullivan sees something in their eyes that troubles him more than fear. Admiration. The same deadly allure that once drew a young man named Michael Sullivan into becoming the ghost of Santa Fe. Instead of gunfighting, he says, moving to the blackboard, let's talk about David and Goliath, about how true strength comes not from weapons, but from faith, and a commotion outside interrupts the lesson. Sullivan moves to the window, the children crowding behind him. A rider is galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. Father Sullivan, the man shouts, reining in hard. Father Sullivan! Wheeler appears from his office, hand on his gun. What is it, Pete? What's wrong? The rider, one of Wheeler's scouts, dismounts shakily. Blackwood. He's gathered his men at Devil's Fork. But that's not the worst of it. He pauses, catching his breath. He's got hostages. The Anderson family. They were moving their herd. When Blackwood's gang caught them, Sullivan turns to Sister Maria, who has appeared in the doorway. Get the children home. Now. But Father, Tommy begins. Now. Sullivan's voice brooks no argument. As Sister Maria hurries the children out, he turns back to the scout. How many hostages? 4. John Anderson, his wife, and their 2 girls. Sullivan's face hardens. Devil's Fork, you said? Wheeler steps closer. Michael, you can't be thinking... How long? Sullivan interrupts. The scout wipes his face. Blackwood said he'll wait 1 hour after that. He draws a finger across his throat. Sullivan moves swiftly toward the church door, his cassock swirling like dark wings. Tom, get your deputies ready, but keep them back unless I signal. It's a trap, Wheeler calls after him. You know that. Of course it is. Sullivan pauses at the door, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. But sometimes the only way to spring a trap is to walk into it with your eyes open. And if Blackwood wants to see the ghost so badly, his right hand drops to the hidden gun beneath his cassock. Then let's give him exactly what he's asking. 4. Devil's Fork lies 10 miles outside of Redemption's Cross, where the canyon walls rise like cathedral spires against the bleeding sunset. As Sullivan prepares to ride out, he finds his path blocked by an unlikely group. 6 young men from the town, led by Jake Martinez's older brother, Miguel. We're riding with you, Father, Miguel announces, checking the load in his revolver. "We all know how to shoot." Sullivan studies their faces. Boys trying to be men, each wearing a gun belt that hasn't seen real action. Knowing how to shoot and knowing how to kill are different things entirely. But there are at least 15 of Blackwood's men, another, youth Peter Cooper, protests. Even the Ghost can't take on that many alone. The Ghost never worked alone. Sheriff Wheeler's voice cuts in as he approaches, leading his horse. That was just another story people like to tell. Isn't that right? Michael? Sullivan's eyes narrow. The Dead Man's Gulch story. You always knew there was more to it, didn't you, Tom? Figured it out years ago. You had help that day. Men positioned in the rocks above the gulch. That's how you survived 15 gunmen. The young men shift uneasily as Sullivan nods slowly. Strategy beats speed, position beats numbers, and a man who thinks he's walking into an unfair fight. He pauses, often walks right into a trap of his own making. Then let us help, Miguel insists. We can be your hidden guns. Sullivan turns to Wheeler. Your call, Sheriff. They're your deputies. Wheeler strokes his mustache thoughtfully. Might work. If we do it right? No. Sullivan's voice is firm. Not yet. First, they need to learn. And we have exactly 45 minutes to teach them the difference between target shooting and staying alive. He leads the group behind the church to a small practice yard. 6 bottles stand on a fence, catching the dying sun. Shoot them, Sullivan commands. The young men draw and fire. 4 bottles shatter, now. Sullivan's hand moves like liquid lightning, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. 6 new bottles explode before anyone can blink. That's the ghost shooting. That's what Blackwood's men will expect. The young men stare in awe, but Sullivan continues, his voice hard. And that's exactly what will get you killed. Speed is for stories. Survival is about something else entirely. He sets up new bottles. Watch again. But this time, watch my feet, not my hand. Sullivan draws again, but now they see it. How he steps sideways as he shoots, presenting a smaller target. How his body seems to flow like water around an imaginary opponent's line of fire. The ghost step, Wheeler explains. That's what kept him alive all those years. Not just speed, movement. For the next 30 minutes, Sullivan drills them relentlessly. How to shoot from cover, how to move between positions, how to coordinate their fire so that when one reloads, another is ready. Remember, he says as they practice, Blackwood's men are killers, but they're also proud, arrogant. They'll expect the ghost to come in shooting, to make some grand entrance worthy of the stories. What they won't expect, Wheeler adds, is strategy. Dr. Mitchell arrives with her medical bag. The Anderson family. I treated their youngest girl last month for fever. She's only 6, Michael. Sullivan nods grimly. Which is why we're doing this right. He turns back to the young deputies. You're not here to fight. You're here to protect. To save lives. Remember that when the shooting starts. Sister Maria appears with a bundle. Your old duster, she says quietly. From before. I kept it. Just in case. Sullivan takes the long black coat, its leather worn, but well maintained. The ghost's shadow, he murmurs. Never thought I'd wear it again. As the sun touches the horizon, Sullivan lays out the plan. Wheeler and Cooper, you'll take the high ground here, he marks in the dust. Martinez and Rodriguez, the canyon wall gives cover there. The rest of you, spread out along these points. Don't bunch up. Don't try to be heroes. What about you? Miguel asks. I'll be the one thing Blackwood can't resist, bait. He wants the ghost? I'll give him a ghost. Something that moves in the shadows, that strikes and vanishes. And the hostages? Dr. Mitchell asks. That's why we're really there, Sullivan reminds them. Everything else is just decoration. Wheeler, your men don't fire unless I give the signal or unless the hostages are in immediate danger. Understood? They all nod, faces serious in the Gathering dusk. One last thing, Sullivan says, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Prayer isn't just for Sunday service. I've found it works pretty well in a gunfight, too. Keep your hand steady, your mind clear. He looks at each young face, in turn. But the most important prayer is the one you say for the man you might have to kill. Because taking a life, that marks your soul in ways that never heal. Sister Maria touches his arm. Yet here you are, ready to do it again. Sometimes, Sullivan responds, checking his guns one final time. The only way to serve God is to walk, straight into hell. He dons the black duster, and suddenly the transformation is complete. The priest vanishes, and in his place stands something darker, more dangerous. Remember? He tells the young deputies as they mount up. Blackwood thinks he's setting a trap for the ghost, but the ghost? He pulls on black gloves, the right one fitting like a second skin over his legendary gun hand. The ghost has had 5 years to plan this dance. As they ride out, the setting sun paints the sky the color of spilled blood. Behind them, redemptions. Cross grows quiet. It's people gathering in the church to pray, not just for the hostages, but for the soul of a priest who must now become a killer again to save them. Wheeler rides up beside Sullivan. You really think they're ready for this? Sullivan watches the young deputies, seeing not their nervousness, but their determination. They're ready to learn the hardest lesson of all, Tom, that sometimes the only thing standing between good people and evil is other good people willing to do violence on their behalf. The wind picks up, carrying the first cool breath of night. Somewhere ahead, Blackwood waits with his hostages, thinking he's about to spring a trap on a legend. But legends, like ghosts, have a way of turning the tables. And as darkness falls, over Devil's Fork, the ghost of Santa Fe rides again, not alone this time, but with justice at his back and vengeance in his heart. Devil's Fork lives up to its name in the gathering darkness, its twisted rock formations casting shadows like demons' horns against the purple sky. Sullivan and his makeshift posse approach silently, the young deputies already displaying the stealth he drilled into them mere hours ago. Through his spyglass, Sullivan surveys the scene below. The Anderson family sits huddled together near a campfire. John Anderson, his wife Mary, and their 2 daughters, Emma and Sarah. Around them, Blackwood's men lounge with the casual menace of wolves circling wounded prey. 15 men, Wheeler whispers from beside him. Just like the scout said, all of them are killers. Sullivan's eyes narrow as he spots a familiar face among the gang. Not all of them. See that one by the horses? Bobby Weeks. Used to run with the Colton gang until they were wiped out. He's no killer, just a coward who likes to ride with strong men. That's useful. Fear makes men predictable, Tom. And predictable men make mistakes. Miguel Martinez crawls up beside them, moving surprisingly quietly for a youth who'd never seen real combat. Father, we've got the positions you wanted. Peter and James are up on the ridge. Rodriguez and Cooper are covering the back exit of the canyon. Sullivan nods approvingly. Good. Now remember, no one moves until a shot rings out, the bullet kicking up dust near Sullivan's position. The young deputies instinctively duck, but Sullivan remains still, analyzing the trajectory. Warning shot, he murmurs. From the tall rocks to the left. They've spotted us. A voice booms across the canyon. Come on down, Ghost, we got some. Folk here really anxious to meet you. Sullivan recognizes the voice, Marcus Blackwood himself. The man's been practicing that tone, probably rehearsing this moment for 5 years. Your men seem a mite jumpy, Marcus, Sullivan calls back, his voice carrying easily in the evening air. Bad for the nerves being so trigger-happy. A harsh laugh echoes back. Still playing games, Ghost? Or should I call you Father Sullivan now? Heard you found God. Guess my brother's death weighed heavier on you than I thought. Sullivan's right. Hand tightens imperceptibly. Your brother drew first, Marcus. We both know that. do we? Blackwood's voice turns ugly. Way I heard it, you shot him before he cleared the leather. The great ghost of Santa Fe, too scared to face a fair fight. If that's what you need to believe, Sullivan turns to Wheeler. Get your men ready. This is about to get complicated, Blackwood's voice rings out again. Tell you what, Ghost, let's make this simple. You and me, face to face. Winner takes all. Loser. He grabs little Sarah Anderson by the arm, making her cry out. Well, let's just say these good folks are counting on you being as fast as the stories say. Sullivan's face hardens as he watches Sarah struggle. She's wearing the same blue ribbon in her hair that she had in church last Sunday. He'd complimented her on it, told her it reminded him of the sky God painted. Michael, Wheeler warns, he's trying to bait you. I know. Sullivan stands slowly, letting his black duster catch the last rays of sunlight. And I'm going to let him. Miguel grabs his arm. Father, you can't. It's suicide. No, Sullivan says quietly. It's a strategy. Remember what I taught you about proud men? About arrogance? He checks his guns one last time. Blackwood's waited 5 years for this moment. He won't be able to resist playing it out exactly as he's imagined it. And how's he imagined it? A grand showdown. The infamous ghost against the man who finally brought him down. Sullivan's voice drops lower. Which means every eye down there will be on me. Nobody'll be watching the shadows where all of you are waiting, Wheeler catches on. A ghost story. Exactly. But this time the ghost isn't going to be the one doing the haunting. He turns to Miguel. When you see my signal, you and your men take out their sentries, quietly, then work your way to the hostages. What's the signal? Sullivan smiles grimly. You'll know it when you see it. Just remember, protect the innocent first. Vengeance is a luxury we can't afford right now. He starts down the slope, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Behind him, Wheeler positions his men, each one finding their place in the elaborate dance of death about to unfold. Coming down, Marcus, Sullivan calls out. Just remember, whatever happens next, you asked for it. 5 years of asking by my count. Blackwood steps into the firelight. He's shorter than the stories make him seem, but his eyes burn with a fanatic's intensity. The silver cross hanging from his gun belt, his brother's last possession, glints in the flames. Well, well, Blackwood drawls, the mighty ghost himself. Tell me, does that collar chafe, or does it help hide the fear? Sullivan stops 20, paces out, exactly where Blackwood wants him, exactly where every gun in the camp can draw a clear bead on him. Let the family go, Marcus. This is between us. Oh, but they're my insurance. Blackwood grins, revealing a gold tooth. Can't have any of your hidden friends getting ideas. Though I gotta say, training up some local boys to play soldier, that's pretty desperate, even for you. Sullivan's eyes narrow. Of course, Blackwood would have spotted the deputies. The man's no fool, just a man blinded by hate and pride. Two weaknesses that, properly used, could be deadlier than any bullet. No. Friends, Sullivan says clearly, making sure his voice carries to where the young deputies wait. No tricks, just you and me, like you wanted. Though I have to wonder. Wonder what? If you're really ready to find out the truth about your brother's death, about why he really drew on me that day. Sullivan's right hand hangs loose at his side, but his fingers dance ever so slightly. A message to those watching from the shadows. About the woman he killed in cold blood. The reason I was hunting him in the first place. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. You're lying! Am I? Ask Bobby Weeks over there. He rode with your brother back then. He knows what happened in that saloon in Dodge City. Don't you, Bobby? All eyes turn to Weeks, who suddenly looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. And in that moment of distraction, Sullivan's fingers complete their dance, the signal his men have been waiting for. The ghost story is about to begin. The night air grows thick with tension as Sullivan's fingers complete their silent message. In the shadows above, Miguel catches the signal and moves like a ghost himself, his knife finding the throat of Blackwood's nearest sentry before the man can cry out. Across the canyon, Peter Cooper does the same, his youth betrayed only by a slight tremor in his hands as he lowers the body quietly to the ground. But Bobby Weeks, sweating under the weight of Sullivan's accusation, suddenly recognizes the silence. "Boss," he shouts, "the lookouts ain't responding." Blackwood's eyes narrow, but his gun remains trained on Sullivan. "Nice try, Ghost. It's really nice. But I've had 5 years to plan this. You think I didn't expect tricks?" He whistles sharply, and from the darkness emerge 5 more men, pushing Wheeler and 2 of the young deputies before them. The sheriff's face is bloody, his hands bound. "Found these ones trying to sneak around behind us," one of Blackwood's men announces. Amateur work, really. Sullivan's expression doesn't change, but inside, his mind races through calculations. 3 deputies captured, 3 still hidden. The odds are getting worse by the second. "You know what your problem is, Ghost?" Blackwood's voice drips with satisfaction. "You're still thinking like a gunfighter. But me? I've learned to think like a hunter. And the best way to catch a ghost..." He suddenly grabs little Sarah Anderson, pressing his gun to her head. "Is to make sure it has nowhere to run. Let her go, Marcus." Sullivan's voice carries a warning that makes even Blackwood's hardened men shift uneasily. "She's just a child." "Like my brother's girl was just a child," Blackwood snarls. "The one who grew up without a father because of you?" Sullivan's right. Hand remains carefully still. "Your brother made his choice when he killed that woman in Dodge City. When he shot an unarmed mother in front of her children." "Lies!" Blackwood's face contorts. "All lies!" "Tell them, Bobby," Sullivan calls out, his eyes never leaving Blackwood. "Tell them what really happened that day. Tell them why Jake Blackwood really died." All eyes turn to Weeks again, who looks like he's about to be sick. I can't." "Can't what?" Blackwood demands. "He's right, boss." Weeks finally croaks. "Your brother. He killed her. Shot her down just 'cause she recognized him from a wanted poster. Said we couldn't leave witnesses." The revelation hangs in the air like gun smoke. Sullivan sees the moment doubt creeps into the eyes of some of Blackwood's men. Men who'd been fed a different story for years. "You're both lying," Blackwood whispers. But there's a tremor in his voice now. His gun hand shakes slightly against Sarah's head. "No, Marcus," Sullivan says quietly. "I gave your brother a chance to surrender. He drew instead, just like you're about to do." "What are you talking about?" "I've got all the cards here, Ghost. Your men are caught, the hostages are..." "Look around you, Marcus. Really look. Count your men." Blackwood's eyes dart around the camp, and suddenly he realized 3 more of his men have vanished silently into the darkness while everyone was focused on the drama unfolding. The remaining deputies, moving like shadows in the night, just as Sullivan taught them. "You're still thinking like a hunter," Sullivan continues, his voice carrying across the now silent canyon. "But a ghost? A ghost teaches others how to haunt, as..." If on cue, Miguel's voice rings out from somewhere in the darkness. "We've got clear shots on 5 of your men, Blackwood, the ones closest to the hostages." Peter Cooper's voice comes from another direction entirely. 2 more covered over here." "Amateur work, was it?" Sullivan's mouth quirks slightly. "Or maybe you just underestimated what a priest could teach about patience, about watching, about waiting for the right moment." Blackwood's face twists with fury. "Kill them all!" he screams. But his men hesitate, unsure now which shadows might hold death. That moment of hesitation is all Sullivan needs. His right hand moves with that terrible liquid speed, but he doesn't draw. Instead, he throws something that glints in the firelight, a silver cross torn from his rosary. Blackwood's eyes follow it instinctively, and in that split second, Sarah Anderson drives her heel down hard on his foot, just as Sullivan had whispered to her to do when he'd first walked into the camp. The girl tears free as chaos erupts. Sullivan's gun seemingly materializes in his hand, firing twice before anyone can blink. Blackwood's gun goes flying as he staggers back, his shooting hand shattered. 2 more of his men fall, wounded but alive, the ghost's bullets finding arms and legs with surgical precision. "Now!" Sullivan roars, and his hidden deputies open fire from the darkness. Not killing shots, but carefully placed bullets that drive Blackwood's men away from the hostages, away from Wheeler and the captured deputies. But Blackwood, mad with pain and rage, pulls a hidden derringer with his left hand. "Die, you sanctimonious!" The shot that cuts him off doesn't come from Sullivan. Bobby Weeks stands trembling, his smoking gun trained on his former boss. "No more lies," he whispers. "No more killing innocent women." Blackwood collapses, clutching his shoulder as his remaining men throw down their weapons. Within moments, Wheeler and the captured deputies are free, securing the prisoners with their own ropes. Sullivan holsters his gun and quickly checks on the Anderson family. "Is anyone hurt?" Little Sarah looks up at him with wide eyes. Did you know that would work, Father?" "I had faith," he answers softly, "both in God's justice and in a brave little girl's strength." But as Wheeler's men round up the last of Blackwood's gang, Sullivan notices something wrong. The triumph in Bobby Weeks' eyes has turned to calculation. The man's gun is still raised, but now it's pointing at Sullivan's back. "Sorry, Father," Weeks calls out. "But the bounty on the ghost of Santa Fe, it's still mighty tempting." Sullivan doesn't turn around. He doesn't have to, because Bobby Weeks never learned the most important lesson about ghost stories. They're never quite over when you think they are. "I wouldn't." Miguel's voice comes from right behind Weeks. "The ghost taught us more than just shooting." Weeks' gun clatters to the ground as he realizes he's surrounded by shadows that have learned to haunt just as well as their teacher. And in the darkness of Devil's Fork, a priest who was once the deadliest gunman in the territory allows himself a small smile. Because sometimes the best way to exorcise old ghosts is to teach new ones how to protect instead of harm. Dawn breaks over Devil's Fork, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold. Wheeler's deputies lead the last of Blackwood's men toward waiting wagons, while Dr. Mitchell tends to the wounded. She's prioritized them by need rather than allegiance, a fact that makes some of Blackwood's men eye her with confused respect. Marcus Blackwood sits propped against a rock, his shattered hand bandaged, his face a mask of bitter defeat. Sullivan approaches him slowly, still wearing the black duster that marks him as the ghost. 5 years of planning, Blackwood spits. 5 years of dreaming about killing you. And in the end, you didn't even have the courtesy to shoot me yourself. Death isn't courtesy, Marcus. Neither is revenge. Sullivan kneels beside his fallen enemy. Your brother's daughter, Catherine, she's 15 now, living with her mother's sister in Kansas City. Blackwood's head snaps up. How do you... I've sent money. Every month for 5 years. Anonymous donations to help with her schooling. Sullivan's voice carries no pride, only a weary certainty. Because your brother's sins, and mine, shouldn't shadow her future. Why? Blackwood whispers, his rage cracking to reveal something more vulnerable beneath. Why tell me this now? Because you have a choice to make. The territorial marshal will be here by sunset. The bounty on your head, it's enough to pay for Catherine's entire university education. Sullivan lets that sink in. Or you can keep feeding your hate rot in prison and leave her with nothing but another ghost in her family tree. Bobby Weeks, now securely bound, watches this exchange with growing amazement. You knew, didn't you? He calls out. Knew I'd try to turn on you? Sullivan stands, brushing dust from his knees. Fear makes men predictable, Bobby. We discussed that already. But you let me do it anyway. Why? Because sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to let someone learn it for themselves. Sullivan turns to Miguel and the other young deputies. Remember that. The hardest victories aren't won with bullets. They're won with patience, understanding, and the wisdom to know when not to shoot. Miguel nods slowly, his young face thoughtful. Like how you didn't kill any of them, even when you could have. Especially then. Sullivan's right hand flexes unconsciously. The ghost was a killer, but a priest has to be something more. I have to show there's always another way, even when it seems impossible. Wheeler approaches, his face still showing. Traces of dried blood, but his eyes bright with pride. Well, these boys of yours proved that tonight. Moved like shadows, just like you taught them. Didn't fire a single killing shot. Because they understood the real lesson, Sullivan responds. It's not about being the fastest or the deadliest. It's about protecting life, even the lives of those who might not deserve it. Little Sarah Anderson tugs at Sullivan's duster. Father, can we go home now? Mama says we shouldn't be around all this violence. Sullivan kneels to her level. Your mama's right. But first, tell me, why did you do what I asked? When I signaled you to step on Blackwood's foot? That was very brave. The girl's face turned serious. Because you told us in Sunday school that sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared. A ghost of a smile touches Sullivan's lips. You were listening that day. I always listen, she says solemnly, even when Tommy Wheeler makes faces behind your back. Wheeler coughs to hide a laugh as he oversees his men loading the prisoners. But Sullivan notices something, how the young deputies handle even Blackwood's men with firm but gentle care, how they make sure the wounded are comfortable in the wagons. Small acts of mercy learned from a man who once dealt only in death. Dr. Mitchell finishes bandaging the last of the wounded and approaches Sullivan. Not one dead, she observes. Rather unusual for a gunfight of this size, the ghost. Knew how to kill, Sullivan responds quietly. The priest had to learn something harder, how to stop violence without adding to its toll. As the sun climbs higher, the group prepares to return to Redemption's Cross. But before they leave, Sullivan has one last task. He walks to where the Anderson family waits and removes his black duster. Mr. Anderson, he says, holding out the coat. Would you mind carrying this back to town? I think the ghost won't be needing it anymore. John Anderson takes the duster with understanding in his eyes. And what will the priest be wearing? Sullivan removes a spare black cassock from his saddlebag. What he should have been wearing all along. Sometimes we have to revisit our past. He dons the cassock, and suddenly he's transformed again, not into the ghost, but into something more powerful. But we don't have to live there. As they ride back to town, the young deputies cluster around Sullivan, eager to discuss the night's events. But he notices something remarkable. They're not talking about the shooting or the action. Instead, they're discussing how they worked together, how they protected each other, and how they managed to end the threat without taking lives. You taught us well, Father, Miguel says quietly. No, Sullivan corrects him. You taught yourselves. I just showed you that there's always another way, if you have the courage to look for it. The morning sun catches his silver cross as they ride, making it shine like a star against his black cassock. Behind them, Devil's Fork recedes into shadow, taking with it the last remnants of the ghost of Santa Fe. But in his place rides something far more formidable, a man who learned that the hardest battles aren't won with guns, but with wisdom, mercy, and the strength to choose a different path. The news of what happened at Devil's Fork reaches Redemption's Cross before the riders do. Sister Maria stands on the church steps, watching as townspeople gather in the street, their whispered conversations carrying on the morning breeze. Mayor Crawford paces outside his office, repeatedly checking his pocket watch and squinting toward the horizon. When the dust cloud finally appears on the road, the entire town holds its breath. Then someone spots the Anderson children riding safely beside Sullivan, and a collective sigh of relief ripples through the crowd. But as the procession draws closer, the whispers start again. Not about the ghost's legendary speed this time, but about something else entirely. Not one dead, the whispers say. He took down Blackwood's entire gang without killing a single man. Sullivan leads the group, once again wearing his priest's cassock, the silver cross at his throat catching the sunlight. Behind him come Wheeler's deputies with their prisoners, the young men carrying themselves with a new dignity that has nothing to do with guns and everything to do with the wisdom earned in the darkness of Devil's Fork. Dr. Mitchell's wagon follows, carrying the wounded, both friend and former foe, all treated with equal care. Blackwood sits among them, his face a study in conflicted emotions as he watches Sullivan through narrowed eyes. The territorial marshal's already here, Sister Maria informs Sullivan as he dismounts. Waiting in the church. Sullivan nods, unsurprised. And the children? All gathered for their lesson, just as you asked. Though I'm not sure teaching is what you should be doing right after. She gestures at his dust-covered clothes, the subtle signs of the night's violence. Teaching is exactly what I should be doing, Sullivan responds quietly. Because what happened last night, that's the most important lesson of all. Inside the church, Marshal Clayton Banks stands examining the cross above the altar. He's a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that have seen too much frontier justice to believe in easy answers. Interesting service you ran last night, Father, Banks drawls without turning around. Don't recall gunfight being in any liturgy I've ever heard. There are many ways to serve, Marshal. Sullivan moves to stand beside him. Sometimes the hardest part is choosing the right one for the moment. 15 of Blackwood's men captured, not a single fatality. Now Banks does turn, fixing Sullivan with a penetrating stare. The ghost I remember wouldn't have left witnesses. The ghost is dead. Has been 5 years. Has he? Banks gestures toward the Sunday school room, where the children's voices can be heard reciting their lessons. Those kids in there, they're talking about last night like it's some kind of miracle. The priest who moves like smoke, teaches young men to be shadows, brings down the wicked without taking a single life. Not a miracle, Sullivan corrects. Just a choice. The same choice we all have to make, whether to add to the world's violence or try to subtract from it, even when it seems impossible. The marshal's weathered face cracks into a slight smile. You know, when I heard the ghost had become a priest, I thought it was some kind of joke, or worse, a clever way to hide. But watching those young deputies of Wheeler's bring in the prisoners, seeing how they handled them with firm mercy instead of cruelty, he shakes his head in wonder. Maybe you've found a better way to haunt the wicked than just putting them in the ground. Everything that lives casts a shadow, Marshal. The trick is teaching that shadow to protect rather than harm. A commotion outside interrupts their conversation. Bobby Weeks is being led to the marshal's wagon, but he's struggling, trying to turn back toward the church. Father, he calls out. Father Sullivan. Sullivan steps onto the church porch, aware of all eyes turning to watch this exchange. I need to know, Weeks says, his voice cracking. All those years riding with Jake Blackwood, watching him kill. I could have stopped him. Could have said something. done something. Is it too late for men like me? Sullivan studies him for a long moment. The Bible tells us it's never too late for redemption, Bobby. But redemption isn't just about asking forgiveness. It's about earning it, about making different choices going forward. Like you did? When did you become a priest? No, Sullivan responds thoughtfully, like I'm still doing every day. The past doesn't go away. We just choose how to carry it, whether to let it weigh us down or use it to lift others up. As Weeks is led away, Miguel approaches with the other young deputies. The prisoners are secured, Father, but some of them, they're asking if you'll visit them in prison. Say they want to learn more about this different way you talked about. Sullivan's mouth quirks in a slight smile. Then I suppose I'll have to add prison ministry to my duties. And us? Peter Cooper asks. What happens to us now? That depends. Sullivan looks at each young face in turn. Do you want to keep learning? Not just about handling guns, but about handling the weight that comes with them, about choosing mercy over vengeance, protection over pride. The young men exchange glances, then nod solemnly. Then meet me here every Thursday evening, Sullivan tells them. We'll study more than just shooting. We'll study how to be the kind of men this territory really needs. Men who know that true strength isn't about how fast you can draw, but how long you can wait before drawing at all. As the young deputies disperse, Sister Maria touches Sullivan's arm. The children are waiting for their lesson. Sullivan straightens his cassock and heads toward the Sunday school room, but he pauses at the door, looking back at the silver cross that caught the morning sun just hours ago at Devil's Fork. You know, he says softly. Someone once told me that God's house is no place for violence. But maybe what we really need is to make the whole world God's house. A place where even old ghosts can learn new ways to protect, to serve, to guide others toward the light. The children's voices lift in prayer as Sullivan enters the classroom, and outside, the morning sun continues to rise over Redemption's cross, casting shadows that no longer bring fear, but promise instead. 1 month after the events at Devil's Fork, Father Michael Sullivan stands at his church altar in the soft light of evening, preparing for tomorrow's service. The worn leather of his gun belt now hangs in a special display case beside the altar, not hidden away, but transformed into a testament to the power of change. The sound of horses draws his attention to the window. Outside, Miguel Martinez and the other young deputies are returning from their patrol, their bearing now carrying the quiet confidence of men who understand the weight of responsibility. They've taken to wearing silver crosses alongside their badges, a reminder of the lessons learned in darkness. Still hard to believe, Sheriff Wheeler says from the doorway, his spurs jingling softly as he enters. A month ago, those boys could barely handle themselves in a fight. Now they're the finest peace officers in the territory. Sullivan continues arranging the altar cloths. They learned the hardest lesson of all, that true strength lies not in how many men you can kill, but in how many you can spare. Words, spreading, you know. Wheeler moves to stand beside his friend. About the priest who used to be the ghost, about how he teaches men to protect without destroying. Marshal Banks says 3 other towns have asked if you'd consider visiting, sharing your unique approach to peacekeeping. And what did the marshal say? Said he'd never seen anything like it. The prisoners from Blackwood's gang. Most of them have asked to serve their time helping to build the new schoolhouse. Even Marcus himself. Sullivan pauses in his work. How is he? Changed. That letter you helped him write to his niece, Catherine. It seemed to break something loose in him. He's asked to work with troubled youth once he's served his time. Says he wants to stop ghosts from being born. The evening light streams through the stained glass windows, painting colors across the church floor. Outside, the sounds of Redemption's Cross drift in, children playing, horses trotting, the general busy hum of a town at peace with itself. "Father?" Little Sarah Anderson's voice pipes up from the entrance. She stands there with a small group of children, including Tommy Wheeler, all clutching books. "Story time already?" Sullivan smiles, gesturing inside. "We want to hear about the ghost again," Tommy says eagerly. "About how he learned to be something else." "No," Sarah corrects firmly. "We want to hear about the priest who taught the ghost how to protect instead of harm." Sullivan settles into a pew as the children gather around. "Why don't I tell you a different story? About how strength isn't always found in a gun's barrel, and how sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is choose not to fight at all." Dr. Mitchell appears in the doorway, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "Your Thursday evening class is gathering outside," she reminds him. "The new students are particularly eager to begin. The students, a mix of young deputies, reformed outlaws, and men seeking a different path, wait in the churchyard. Among them stands Bobby Weeks, recently released on good behavior, wearing a silver cross of his own. They're not here to learn about gunfighting," Sullivan tells the children. "They're here to learn about something far more powerful, the courage to show mercy, the strength to choose peace, and the wisdom to know when to stand firm without standing violent." Sister Maria brings in a lamp as the evening light fades. "And what about you, Michael? Has the ghost finally found his peace?" Sullivan looks around the church, at the children eager for stories of redemption rather than violence, at the young deputies who've learned to be guardians rather than warriors, at the gun belt displayed not as a weapon, but as a reminder of transformation. "The ghost isn't gone," he says thoughtfully. "He's just learned a different way to haunt, not through fear, but through hope. Not through death, but through the chance for new life." He stands, straightening his cassock. "Which is why we keep his memory, not to glorify what he was, but to remind us of what we can become. Every shadow can learn to protect, every ghost can learn to guide, and every soul, no matter how lost, can find its way to redemption." The sunset paints the church in shades of gold and crimson as Sullivan steps out to meet his evening class. They stand respectfully, these men who've chosen to learn a different kind of strength. Above them, the cross atop the church steeple catches the last light of day, casting a shadow that stretches eastward, not like a gun barrel now, but like a pointing finger, showing the way forward. "Evening, gentlemen," Sullivan greets them. "Shall we begin?" And in that moment, as teachers and students gather to learn about peace from a man who once dealt only in death, the legend of the Ghost of Santa Fe takes on a new form. Not as a tale of the deadliest gunman in the West, but as a story of transformation, of how the fastest gun became the surest hand of mercy, of how a killer became a guardian, and of how even the darkest ghost can learn to serve the light. The children's voices drift out from the church, singing their evening hymn, while in the yard, men who once lived by the gun learn to live by something stronger. And somewhere, in the gathering dusk, the spirit of what the ghost has become rides on, haunting not with fear, but with hope, teaching not death, but life, offering not vengeance, but redemption. For in redemption's cross, they say there still walks a ghost, not one that brings death, but one that shows the way to life. And if you listen carefully in the evening breeze, you might hear his whispered lesson. that the greatest victory isn't in outdrawing your enemy, but in turning enemies into friends, and that true strength lies not in the speed of your hand, but in the mercy of your heart. As the final light fades from the sky, the camera pulls back from Redemption's cross, showing the town peaceful in the gathering dark, the church steeple standing tall, and the promise of a new dawn waiting just beyond the horizon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.